Hey everybody, it's Christina of CraftyPaws. I'm here with a guest design team project for JessicaLynnOriginal.com. She has awesome doggy stamps, a whole bunch of different AKC breeds, and as a guest designer I got to pick from her whole shop, and I picked the Shih Tzu set because we don't have Shih Tzus in our family, but we have an Affenpinscher, a Havanese, a Havapoo, and you can adjust these stamps to fit whatever kind of small fluffy breed you like. And I decided I was gonna choose this set and color up this little cutie like my Havanese Bandito. And Bandito is two-toned in color. He's mostly white in his body, and then he's got some reddish brown spots. And so for the beginning, I thought I would just use a warm gray, this W1, and lay in some shadows in the white areas of this little puppy. So I've kind of trying to follow the, stamp lines where the little fluffy areas are. So underneath those fluffy areas, I'm trying to put in a little bit of shadow. I'm also trying to think about how I was going to blend this out so that it wouldn't look gray, but would look white. So next I go through with a W0, which is even lighter, and kind of blend into the white areas. Next, I'm gonna mark in where his spots are around his eyes, on both eyes, and that's really the only parts that would be visible, his ears and his eye patch areas. So I'm starting in with an E11, which is kind of a reddish, orangey brown color, but pretty light. And then next I decide I'm going to go in a little bit darker, so I'm using an E23, which is like a hazelnut color, a little more russety brown color, and I'm going in and marking in those areas where I thought the brown areas would be just a little bit darker, and on the outside edges and right around his eyes and his nose where it's a little bit darker. And then lastly, I was going to go in with the darkest shadow and use an E25. And this is more of a cocoa-y color. I think it's called Carib Cocoa, and that brings in a warm chocolatey brown color, which is actually, this three color combo is a pretty good match for my Bandito. And I'm just going back in and blending out again, going back lighter with the E23. And then next I was going to just color up his tongue. This is a really easy coloring stamp because there's not a whole lot of detail really. The stamp image has a lot of the detail. So I'm just going back in and putting in slightly darker W3 where the darkest shadows would be, where the cast shadow would be under his face, at the bottom of his body. I'm actually going to cut out the whole image, so you're just going to see the face at the end of it, but I didn't know that when I was first starting coloring up that image. Next, I'm coloring up another one of these cuties from the stamp set, and this one I'm coloring up to be more like an Affenpinscher, which is known as kind of like the monkey face dog. We have an aunt and uncle that have an Affenpinscher, and it's almost black, but as you can see here, I'm starting off with a warm gray again, but this is the darkest color for the white areas of my Havanese. And for the Affenpinscher, which is a black dog, I'm using this as the lightest area of the dog, but trying to mark in where I think the darker areas would be. So I'm testing this out, testing out where I think the shadows would be. Under the muzzle, under the neck, where the ear meets the head, around the eye area where the muzzle and the top of the forehead meet. Now I'm going to go back in and blend out a little bit with a W1. There's going to be maybe a little bit of the white of the cardstock left, but basically I'm just trying to connect those lightest areas with where I think the darker areas are going to be. Next, I'm going in with my darker shadow. It's a W5, and I'm marking in all those areas where I think the cast shadow would be. Where you can see little tufts of fur. Behind those tufts of fur or underneath those tufts of fur, that's where the shadows would be. So I'm going in and marking in all those areas. So if you look above his eyes, there are kind of clumps of fur in the stamped image, and you can kind of mark in underneath or behind those areas, and that'll give a really realistic look to the shadowed areas of fur. Where the head and the neck meet, that's another area where shadows are. You can see I'm going in, adding in more and more color to make this dog look darker. But I didn't want to color the whole thing, really dark because realistically, even with dark fur dogs, you're going to have highlights. So I wanted to make sure I maintained that. Now I'm going to go through and fussy cut this little puppy out. And as you can see here, I'm actually cutting the ears a little bit shorter because the Affenpinscher that my aunt and uncle have actually has shorter ears. And it's really easy to make these kinds of adjustments for these stamped pups because the ears kind of stick out a little bit, and I'm just cutting around the head. That's the full stamped image of this one. For the other little puppy, I end up cutting away most of the body. I think I do that off camera though. But you can make adjustments with these little fluffy dogs because it's so easy to make those changes, especially to the outer areas of the stamped image. So you can give the dogs as short ears as you want. So I'm cutting away a little bit more on both sides. And now I'm just making sure I cut those little flips of the fur, and that's it. Now I decided I need to make the dog's face a little bit even darker. For it to come across as a black dog, I needed to add one more layer of shadow. So I'm using a W7. This is the darkest color I use. I could have gone to a W9, I think, as well, but at the end of this process of adding this one more layer, it ends up, I think, looking like a black dog, just with some highlights from whatever the light source is. And you can see here, I'm going back over the same areas, underneath the head, right around the eyes, those areas that get the cast shadow from the areas above or in front of the back areas. That's where I'm putting in the darkest coloring. And as you can see, I'm going back over the tufts of fur at the top of the head. Those back areas will get those dark shadows underneath the mouth, underneath those tufts of hair around the muzzle. And you can see there, it's looking like a pretty dark colored dog. Now I'm inking up the edges. I always do this when I fussy cut out images because I don't want to see the white of the cardstock. I want to have that black edge. And you can see those nooks and crannies I can get to by just putting the image on top of a scrap piece of paper and going from the back. And that gets into all those tiny nooks and crannies. Now for the card front. I decided I wanted a white card front so I can have these little puppies pop. I'm using a Sending Love die set that I designed for Diamond Dies, and I'm just using the 3 stamp dies to create a card front with 3 frames that I can put each of the puppies in. Now I'm using some double-sided foam tape, and I'm cutting a little strip so that the top can be supported as well as just underneath the frames, and I'm cutting in little thin strips in between those little framed areas so that all of that can be supported as well. This die set, by the way, along with any of the other die sets that I designed for Diamond Dies, a part of the proceeds goes to No Kill Animal Shelter. So I wanted to put in a plug for that. I will put links in the description box, both for JessicaLynnOriginal as well as for this die set, the Sending Love die set. And now I'm just taking off the release paper, and I've cut out a rather large card base from blue cardstock. And you can see I somehow I missed lining each of the framed areas with some pattern floral paper. It's kind of a peach corally color. And now I'm popping up each of the little puppies' heads with more of that double-sided foam adhesive. And I'm using some wet glue to adhere the base of the little puppy's head on the right there, and adding some double-sided foam adhesive for this little white Havapoo that I've colored up to represent my to represent my brother's dog, Cookie, who's a white little Havapoo. Now, as part of that die set, I have the Sending Love sentiment, and I've die cut it out 3 times using the same cardstock that I use for the card base, and that gives me kind of the thickness of a thicker, and it lends some weight and stability and kind of some some heft to these sentiments, and I have carefully stacked them and glued them together so that they form little embellishment kind of sentiments. And I'm gluing that into place kind of in the lower half of this card front. The sending is centered pretty much more toward the right, and the love is all the way over. And I've kind of got this lined up so that the G of sending is lined up with the L of love to create kind of a swooshy, I don't know if that's a technical term, a swooshy look to the sentiment. I remembered to also keep the little dots from the I of sending, and I'm putting that in place. And then lastly, as a finishing touch, I am putting in some sequins, a handful of them. I like doing things like these finishing touches in odd numbers, and I'm just scattering them around the card front to add a little sparkle. Now, for the inside of the card, I did this off camera. I used that die set again, the Sending Love die set for the hearts. I used more of the same pattern floral paper and then some white cardstock and some coral cardstock to create a couple of hearts, one of which I put the white stamped die around. And then that sentiment was a wooden stamp that I had picked up last week at Hobby Lobby on clearance. It says, love begins with a wet nose and ends with a tail. And then that's it. That's the finished card. I hope you've enjoyed this process video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to check out Jessica Lynn Original stamps. She has awesome dog breed stamps, and they're so fun to color up and are perfect for sending cards to dog lovers. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a wonderful crafty day.